farmer view, but obviously it's that sort of combined farmer view. We're not representing just hill country farmers or intensive rearers or dairy or grain arable. We've got to represent the whole lot. So we've got to, when we talk about solutions, we've got to talk about solutions that work for all and focus on solutions that will work for all in that regard. And I guess beyond that, and what I'd really like to do is focus on some of these other things that don't grab the headlines straight away, but they're bubbling in the background. People are talking about it, and actually try and have some thought leadership on some of these subjects. So everyone and their dog's talking about regenerative farming at the moment. I'd like for us to be able to, provide a bit of thought process or thought leadership in that area around what exactly is regenerative farming. What does it mean for New Zealand farmers? Are we already there? Aren't we? What's actually defined by it? Where are we missing? Is that really acceptable? That, or should we really be expecting New Zealand farmers to do this thing? Does the science back it? That sort of thing. Sort of just be a bit more out there on subjects like that. The use of agri-chemicals. I was in the EU a couple of years ago, and they just successfully managed to keep glyphosate, but they were on the realization that it was gone, and the next time it came up for a discussion, it was going to be gone burger. And just because it's got a bad rap, basically because it was Monsanto's big, Monsanto bad. It wasn't. There was no science in the debate. It was really a perception debate, and actually, we need to start, talking a bit about, the importance of some of these chemicals to some of the greener aspects of how we want to farm. You can't do no-till drillage, which preserves soil carbon and stops carbon going in the atmosphere, if you don't have glyphosate. So those are some of the sort of things that, I want to, if we can, focus a little bit more on some of that proactive stuff. Connectivity, obviously, it's a key passion of mine. Things like that, just talk about them more if we've got the opportunity. And obviously, a lot of our oxygen can get sucked up by whatever it is the politicians throw at us, or the reality of the world we're living in sort of throws our way. But if we do get that breathing space, then it's trying to set the agenda on some of these topics is where I'd like to head. And yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell, really. I could blabble on for a lot longer, but I'll just be repeating myself. So, questions?
Andrew, Peter Burke here.
Yep.
Is this regenerative agriculture just a lot of bullshit, or is there something true in it?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. I mean, and where you're looking from in the world. Like what you hear from North America is this, oh, wow, if we rotationally graze our livestock, it makes for healthier pastures and better soil carbon and better soils. Yeah, well, kind of known that in New Zealand for 100 or more years. So that's obviously, part and parcel of our system. It's something new to others. So I think there's definitely aspects of it that are, part of our farming systems, part of what we do. We've just never given them a label, never found the need to sort of virtue signal about doing it. I do think you often get people, no one wants to be part of the big pack. Everyone wants to be able to pretend they're slightly different from everyone else. And I think that's often what you see in a lot of these things is, people want to give themselves a slightly different label than everyone else. And so at the moment, it was organic. Then that got a bit boring and passé. For a while there, it was biological. Now it's regenerative. And each one of them seems to be very similar, but slightly different.
I mean, isn't it also the fact that that people just want safe food now? I mean, you can call it what you like, but at the bottom line at the moment with COVID, surely it's just about getting something that's safe and edible, rather than, do I say it, bullshit labels, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I think it was NZTE, New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. I think that's the one. They did a survey recently, and that was the number one thing. Safe food. That's what. And when I go, to the International Dairy Federation conferences and meetings, that seems to be the number one thing that comes through. It's safe food, and that's what people want to see. And luckily for us in New Zealand, they often perceive, particularly in the pastoral sense, safe food is equals grass-fed. Now, as a farmer, I know that there's still plenty I can do that could stuff up that. But that seems to be an ingrained public perception that if you've got your animals outdoors, everything's fantastic.
But it's like the myth about free-range eggs, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I've got a few of those. They're genuine, as long as I think it's float or sink. I can't remember which one. That's my wife does the sorting to make sure I don't eat the wrong ones.
I know. I've given up on free-range eggs. I used to run a business on that, and it was, I know it's like it's not quite what it says it is. People think free-range eggs are better, taste better. Not quite sure that's
There we go.
true.
The bad eggs float. Someone just mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I think I remember that. Save them up for the parties to throw at people.
Yep.
There's another question there in the chat, Andrew, from Jackie. Your thoughts on the NCAP under the freshwater policy, 190 kilos? Maybe you could widen that out to your thoughts on the freshwater policy.
Yeah. I mean, my concerns there are on a principle basis. Firstly, are we input or are we output? And traditionally, New Zealand, and I think quite rightly, is focused on what are the outputs. What are the outputs we're after? And whereas if you look at the EU, it's all about inputs. So their farmers have a very regimented system in which they're allowed to farm. And to me, it ignores actually what's happening, what are the smart things that farmers could do, and sucks the innovation right out of it. And that's why I think having output-based, sort of systems, you then look at, okay, if I do, I could use 200 kg of N, say, I actually only use about 160 myself, but is there ways I could do that which would then mean that the output isn't as bad as if I just did it in the poor way or whatever. So yeah, I don't like it from that point of view. And then there's the question, is it applicable across all catchments? If we're just gotten these blanket level numbers just across every catchment, does it make sense? Because each catchment's different. Like I said, around here, you'd probably find hardly any farmers doing above 190. But just because no one's above it, I disagree with the having it there in the first place. And I guess that goes to the whole freshwater policy. Is we're all concerned that it's just sort of going for blanket rules at a national level and that don't recognise the differences in catchments. So where I'm at in the Aurora catchment, which feeds into the Manawatu River catchment, just north of Feilding, our big issue is sediment in the waterways. And that's from the Horizon scientist, chief water quality scientist. And, I've heard him talk a couple of times and he said, nutrients aren't the issue. I think we're on an A band for the nitrates, and it really is the sediment that's the problem, and they've addressed that or worked on that through the Sustainable Land Use Initiative. I'm not sure how many are familiar with it, but it is basically working with farmers around farm plans. What are the smart things you can do on your farm that's going to minimize erosion, prevent that sediment loss? And it's worked quite, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it's quite a significant amount of sediment that has been prevented from ending up in the sort of waterways around here by using that approach. And that's sort of the approach I'd like to see taken nationally, really. More about what is each catchment's issue. Is it nutrients? Is it sediment? Is it E. coli? What are the things you need to do on farm, and targeting those critical source areas around the actions that are required. I do, I've got a real worry that we're just going to end up in a really costly, bureaucratic sort of box ticking exercise where people just go through and tick, yes, I've done this, tick, yes, I've done this plan, yes, I've got a plan here that's covered in dust that says I'm doing that, moving on, and sort of just ticking boxes rather than doing things and doing actions. And again, it's about the it's about the outputs, not about just ticking boxes.
I mean, you're an interesting catchment, Andrew, I guess, with the Manawatu there, because you've got the urban as well there. And looking at, say, the Manawatu Palmers North City now, for example, with its own consenting issues, I gather, around sewage, it seems like that the farmers have to take responsibility for what they do on the farms, but the urban area has to, dare I say it, not take responsibility because it costs the ratepayers too much money to do it. Now, I don't know what, Manawatu's case, I think, is an example now, isn't it, where they've got to get new consents for their discharge, and yet no one wants to do the right option because it offends someone or somebody or somehow, and yet it might end up on land which is probably better for production than just having, dare I say it, sewage waste on it.
Yeah, look, I'm not too familiar with what's happening locally. I sort of, particularly with the Palmerston North one, I do know there's certainly a number of farmers concerned about the amount of land that may get taken out of production to put all the sewage across. Obviously, land base is better than putting it into back into the river, which is what or treating it and then putting it into the river, which is what we've been doing. But it's, at the same time, with the same arguments that we run on for us on farms, we've got to recognise that it's relevant for towns as well around the economic ability to do this. Now, certainly, for too long, there have been a number of places that have avoided, putting rates up to meet the critical expenditure. Like, farms, we've had to do this expenditure. But potentially it could be just as bad for farmers and some of the really smaller like I'm thinking Rangitikei particularly. They've got a number of towns with really antiquated sewage systems, and very basically all their rates come from farmers, and those farmers are potentially in for quite a big rates burden to pay for those upgrades. And so hopefully, I guess there was this announcement yesterday from the government that'll go in way to help pay for some of that, which would be good, because we do get a lot of what goes through the region, the tourism, and when we used to have tourism, never really paid its way because those people never really lived there. And so we sort of missed out on that. All that GST earned from that, it all went to central government. So there is a bit of a challenge there, I think, around finding that right balance to make sure everyone's doing their fair share. Certainly think farmers have upped their game in the 20 years I've been in the industry. Certainly the investment that's gone on has been huge in terms of minimising that environmental impact.
Ali has asked a question, Andrew, in the chat.
For a better world.
Yeah, when we've been talking about this, so
Yeah.
you can share.
Look, there's some good aspects to it in terms of the trade. Recognizing the importance of free trade. I think that's important. Right now, there's a lot of people around the world talking about protecting this, protecting that. New Zealand, we're a country that exports 95% of our dairy production, I think, and something like 90 to 95 of our red meat production. So trade's valuable to us. It's vitally important that we have those export markets open. Now, I know this figure's off by hand for dairy and not so well for meat, but for dairy, we're only able to access 13% of the world's consumption at tariff rates less than 10%. So that effectively means like 87% of world consumption just is not a market for us. And, if we're able to improve that market access, it is a game changer for New Zealand farmers, and I think it will help stabilize world prices. As I think a lot of what happens is because that tradable part of the world market is so tiny, when you get these little fluctuation or supply or demand increases or decreases across the whole world, it all gets pushed into that tiny little market that can be traded, and then you get this massive volatility going up and down. So by having more free trade, I think it's good for farmers all over the world, actually. Not that they probably think it, but it will cut down on that volatility. And so that's a really good and important part of what I saw in the document. Definitely liked the stuff around the skills training. By and large, I think it's a reasonable document for MPI to be focused on what it needs to be doing to support the industry. Obviously, they've got, they reference quite boldly the methane targets, which we're not fans of. And I think, the concerns I raised around the essential fresh water before, they don't really see them as being a problem. And so I think there is still possibly a bit of a disconnect between the fact, the impact on production of some of those regulations will have, and whether farmers are actually able to deliver the outcomes they're expecting. And yeah, I'm not sure the two are 100% joined up.
Didn't we also think too, Andrew, there was a bit of an omission in that document in that they didn't talk about the connectivity stuff?
Yeah, and that's connectivity, data interoperability. I know Lane Jager from the Primary Sector Council, he was talking to me afterwards and goes, isn't this great? And, we've got a license to farm. And I said, my problem wasn't the license to farm, it was the 10 bloody licenses to farm that I needed. And, it would be good if I got down to one license rather than 10 of them. So, I think that burden of the constant re-entering of data all over the show is one thing that needs to be worked on. There's all these expectations around farmers to provide all this information across a range of platforms, to be audited, to be verified, to keep everyone happy. But, it takes out time from doing what you want to do, which is out in the farm. And the most annoying part, of course, is generally you're recording all that information anyway on computer programs that are useful to you. So a lot of, I think I have to enter 8 different times how many cows I've got into various programs. Only one of those, the herd recording program, is any use to me. It's what I make decisions on. It records, a lot of the data that's very useful to me, and all these other programs, they could get not only the herd numbers, but all sorts of records, other stuff related to the cows from that computer program. If there was, I think APIs they're called, or just smart systems that could pull that information out. And of course, that's the information that's most accurate because it's important to me. So I take the time and effort to make sure it's correct and it's done right. And if you're able to just pull that information out to put into these other programs, it removes the need for auditing, because a lot of this auditing is based on the assumption that when I open up one computer program and I write down a number, and then I open up the other one and type that number into it, I may get that number, I may misplace a decimal point or something, either accidentally or on purpose. Whereas if you automate that system, it removes either that human error or the human slyness to manipulate those numbers. So to me, that's a key thing of making it a hell of a lot better. And of course, connectivity. We're just about to hit the go button on our connectivity survey again, but it shows that for a lot of farmers, there's, particularly in the central North Island, East Coast, really poor connectivity. There's people out there, they probably can't answer our survey because it's done over the internet and they've barely got landlines. So we do miss out on those guys, but the ones we do connect with, they're still able to provide us with some pretty, one of the best stories I recall was the family when they had their kids visiting who all had professional jobs in town. They would have to go and leave their cell phones in an ice cream container 2K down the road, set up call forwarding from the cell phone to the landline, so all of their calls would get forward because there was no connectivity at the house. And so they were just, hoping that no one would drive by and go, I wonder what's in that ice cream container, and go, woohoo, new iPhone. But that's sort of the lengths people have to go, the DIY, the number 8 solutions farmers have to do to get connectivity. So I do think that sort of holds us back to a degree. But yeah, so it's an okay document. It's not the most exciting document in the world, I don't think, putting it mildly. But it's not something we're going to get all upset about. Obviously, we've already stated our position around the methane, essential fresh water. So look forward to working with them on some of the other stuff.
There's a question here, Andrew, from Kit, talking about the urban understanding of rural issues and the other way around, rural-urban divide, disconnect type stuff. Where are your thoughts on that? And I think too, perhaps sort of after, or sort of with this post-COVID world we live in now, has that made a difference, do you think?
I think the post-COVID world's actually going to be interesting in terms of all of these New Zealanders coming back. I think a lot of the New Zealanders that do go overseas often happen to be farmers' kids that aren't inheriting the farm or buying the farm off mum and dad. So you might actually find a lot of these returning New Zealanders are coming back to rural areas, which might provide a bit of a population boost. Again, a bit of a strain on the connectivity. I think the other thing post-COVID, obviously you got the feeling at times before COVID, there were a few people thought, well, we don't really need agriculture that much because we've got tourism, we've got a few other things, so agriculture can decline a little bit and it'll work its way out. Obviously now we've got agriculture and not a lot else. And we've seen that with the, I think the survey results showing the lift in appreciation for the rural sector. In terms of how on earth you make, I always wonder whether or not it's a social media thing and not actually a real person thing. Because I don't really ever encounter it too much when I'm talking to real people. that urban rural divide sort of stuff. And maybe it's because, I grew up close to town. In fact, I was college of 1,000 students. There was probably about 5 of us off a farm on that college. So I probably grew up in a slightly urban area. So I don't have that challenge of understanding urban. All of my friends all throughout schooling were all from urban backgrounds. But yeah, every time I talk to normal people are just normal. People are just living their lives like I'm living my life. And it's just, I don't know, when people go on social media, it seems like they turn into complete idiots. And it does seem to be quite a social media driven thing, the divide, and there's various things around getting people back on farm, but I think sometimes it's just portraying that normal sort of viewpoint of here's what we're doing on farm, just being frank and open and honest about what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. Obviously there's less people that have an uncle that have a farm now than there was 30 years ago, so there's not as many kids going to the farm on school holidays to experience rural life. So having likes of I think Fonterra have their open days, others are doing, I think there's the Farm Open Day program that's set up. So those are good things to actually enable people to come on farm and to experience it. I know when we ran it many years ago in Feds, I always remember we had a little diagram of the nitrogen cycle beside the effluent pond for that farm tour. And, I always remember a person looking at it and going, yeah, now I understand the whole thing. Just that simple explanation of how everything works in a circle and nutrients are absorbed, applied, and just, the practical down to life examples of it. So many people actually thought that, I remember this survey Horizons Regional Council did years ago about why water quality was bad. And I remember reading in their answers that we need to stop the farmers taking their cows down to the river so they can wash them. And it was like, why on earth would anyone think I had anywhere near enough time in the day to go and wash my cows in the river? And so, so I guess, you're able to get people on farm, you're able to showcase farms a bit more, and people understand the systems and the why. I think it's going to break it down.
It's Rod Slater here, speaking from Beef and Lamb New Zealand in Auckland. So we live right in the thick of the enemy, you could say. Firstly, Andrew, congratulations on your appointment. That's great stuff, and I'm sure you thoroughly deserve it. I don't think we can kid ourselves in terms of this divide that Kit just alluded to. There are numerous, probably the majority almost of people living in this region, and I'm talking Auckland, a third of the population, that have never stepped foot on a farm. We've had people working in this organisation, and they're here promoting beef and lamb and passionate about it. We've fixed it now, but had never actually been on a farm, whether it be a beef and sheep farm or a. So that's the reality of what we are dealing with. And the second thing is that the likes of those people grow up to be politicians and decision makers, and that's where the battleground is. I totally agree with you that since COVID, there has been a little bit of a pendulum swing back to how important agriculture is, but that's a very broad swing, so to speak. And already, we are seeing things coming out now against, call it the anti-farming agenda, call it what you like, but it most certainly hasn't gone away. And I think we might have had a brief respite, but the reality is, and we're dealing with sheep and beef, to be fair, but the consumer, a farmer is a farmer. They don't. Most of them don't make the difference between a dairy farm or a sheep and beef farm.
No.
So we're all in it together, and we're all only as good as our weakest link. So I don't have the answers, that's for sure. But we shouldn't underestimate what a challenge that is and how we have to keep working at it.
Yeah, I think Auckland's probably a bit of a special case as well. It's certainly a hell of a lot easier to connect. Think about anywhere else in the country, it's not such a jog to get people out of the city or the urban environment into the country environment. But Auckland's definitely going to be quite a challenge of how there's just the traffic alone to get out of that city to see farming is going to be a challenge. And it's whether or not, I know through the International Dairy Federation, because all our conferences have been canned for the year, we're doing a lot of things virtually, including virtual farm tours. So I'll be interested to see how that works from that perspective around whether or not it's not something you couldn't do a bit more for urban audiences, not just for, when we always go to these countries, all the farmers just want to hop on a bus and go and see some cows being milked and then compare notes with their farms. So this is how we're going to do it this year. But depending on how useful that is, it's whether or not that's something we in New Zealand couldn't do for our own people, where they don't have that ability or that quick, easy access to farms. And it's probably also going to be important for recruitment as well, and allow people to understand, we're going to need to get a lot more of our staff from Auckland in the future. And so we're going to have to show them what farming looks like to try and encourage them.
Yep.
Just to comment on that, Andrew, though, this has been a story that I can go back 40 years and say there's no difference. Feds were talking about this back in the 70s, to be fair, and the great Ian Fraser was running a campaign, I think, one time to try and do the same thing. So it's not new. It just seems to be, nothing seems to have much changed a lot in my lifetime as an ag journalist, put it that way. That there's still been that issue of the so-called divide, if you want to call it that, or probably just not that, more the misunderstanding. That's just a general comment. But certainly, I think what Katie's comment earlier on about the education actually has to start, not so much in the first instance with the people in the public, but dare I say, with some of the bureaucrats, some of the decision makers, because they're the ones that can get you into trouble. The public can just talk, but the other ones can do something really dumb and make it law. That's the problem, isn't it?
Yes, and that is a particular, there's MPs across all parties that are actually quite passionate and interested in farming. It's quite good to see. But there's a hell of a lot that are completely unaware. And so it's, one of our goals in Feds is trying to make sure we're identifying those important those politicians that not only just resonate with our industry, but also the movers and shakers and the potential movers and shakers in the future, to make sure they understand us, that we're not the enemy, and I guess try and enlighten them into the things that are important for us, so that they don't make hasty, rash decisions that have adverse impacts on farmers.
So yeah, one area that you haven't talked about really, Andrew, is the progress of Hei Waka Eka Noa and how the industry is working with that. Do you want to talk about that for a couple of minutes? Just to bring these guys up to speed?
Yes.
What process is that?
Yeah, so it's been functioning since the start of the year, I think. I think they managed to get the first steering group. Well, there's definitely the first few workshops were held just prior to the lockdown, and then the lockdown hit. But all of the work streams are up and running. Steering groups.
You better tell these guys how many work streams there are.
Oh, geez, I'm struggling to remember them all myself. So there's a steering group at the top that's got, I think, 9 representatives on it. Karen Williams from Feds is one of those reps. You've got representative from Dairy NZ, Beef and Lamb, Hort New Zealand, FOMA, and there's another iwi representative as well, Vaughan Payne from, well, he's not there as his Waikato environment Waikato hat on, but he's there with the iwi hat on. 2 from government and independent chair. I know I'm forgetting someone. Representative from processors. So it's representative from Fonterra, but she's there to not just represent Fonterra, but supposedly all processors, not just dairy processors. Meat processors might probably need to remind her of that occasionally. And so the steering groups basically acts as not really the governance, because that goes all the way to the chairs of all of the organisations, but more of sort of an executive committee that oversees the work streams. And so you've got work streams around carbon sequestration or sequestration on farm, farm plans, farm reporting from farms, pricing mechanisms, and their extension and early adoption. And there's probably 2 or 3 more that have slipped my mind. And each of those has got its own lead, and they're looking to have iwi co-leads as well of those, and then a group of people working away on them. Obviously, the ones we're most interested in are the pricing mechanism work stream, farm reporting, and the farm sequestration work stream. And so basically just making sure that, you know, that we, ideally our goal, what we'd like to see in Feds, is just that the farm system's portrayed accurately, that everything's counted, that you're not just paying on a gross amount, you're paying on that net amount. So whatever the net warming of the farm may be, if there is to be a pricing mechanism, that's what you're paying on. And it may be that the pricing mechanism isn't exactly a tax, it may be something completely different. Unfortunately, yeah, a lot of the media early on just assumed it was ag entering the ETS, which is not what it is. And so that process was sort of a bit into the first year of it. Feedback I've had is mixed across the work streams. This is from our guy that's involved in it. Certainly there's been, well, there'll continue to be tension across various things to do with the pricing. And in the sequestration, just the sort of government focus has just been around counting trees on farms, where actually there's, you know, more we'd like to see around understanding soil carbon and other aspects. You know, I keep hearing about wetlands as, you know, supposedly the amount of carbon they store more than offsets the methane they release. So there is a net positivity to them. And so having more understanding around that, just so farmers have got a clear understanding of all the options that are available to them. And particularly that reporting work stream, it's making sure that it's, you know, I talked about before about the 8 different things I have to put my cow numbers into. Well, I don't want there to be a 9th. So making sure that, you know, that whole thing I was talking about of, you know, enter data once and it does the job, that it is a smart system that utilises what's already in place that we don't go and reinvent the wheel once again. That's pretty much, yeah, and I guess that is quite a tight time frame. We've got to show results by, or early results by the 1st of January 2022, I think. So in reality, some of those results are going to need, and to do that, because it's based on a calendar year and we work in a farm production year, actually there's a number of the results we've actually got to start counting right now, because they'll be, the final data will be recorded in the farm reporting system the 31st of May 2021. And so to be able to provide data at the end of, at the start of 2022, it's in fact, yeah, it's got to be collected between June and May next year. So we're actually, hopefully, I think for those targets, we're already on track for achieving them. So hopefully that all comes off. But it's how we progress in some of these other work. Probably the pricing mechanism one will be the challenging time frame, because I believe it's in 2022 we need to be able to give the government or the Climate Change Commission some guidance as to where we're heading with that. And that's a meaty topic, and it's a very confusing and technical one to work out what is the best system. I mean, the Interim Climate Change Commission was supposed to come up with a solution, and they never did, because it was, in the end it comes down to sort of two options. If you're going at the farm level, it comes down to an absolute sort of system where you're looking at the absolute emissions from a farm, or you're looking at the efficiency target from the farm. And so an absolute sort of system is going to reward areas like Northland, East Coast, areas which Westland, where there's potentially a lot of native bush still on the farms. They're not very intensive, and they'll do better under that system than like Canterbury. Canterbury will get hammered under an absolute thing, because basically you've got your square bit of grass with the centre pivot in the middle, and you're geared up for production. Whereas under an efficiency mechanism, then it's going to be the complete opposite. So those Canterbury farms that are irrigated, growing a lot of grass, utilising a lot of grass, they'll potentially be the most efficient, and then the complete opposite for Northland, East Coast, Westland. They're probably at the other end of the efficient. This is just generalisations. You'll find efficient farms in every region, but if we were to break it down on a regional basis, which I think had been done, and I think those were the sort of numbers or trends they did see, that's going to be the challenge. And rightly or wrong, each system had its merits. The absolute system was, it measured the absolute sort of actual numbers per hectare. And then the efficiency was, actually recognising, well, we still need an export industry. Paris Accord still talks about food production, so it's about how do we produce as much food for the less impact as possible. And so the Interim Climate Commission came up. I think their report said we need to have a hybrid of the two, but they could never work it out. So this is a challenge industry's faced with right now, is there some sort of hybrid of the two where we can come up with, what is a good mechanism that recognises the positive aspects of both sort of approaches, or is there something completely different? Or do we just look at what track are we on anyway, just by providing information to farmers, utilising the latest research, and do we actually need to have a pricing mechanism in the background, or will just continuing on how we've continued on actually deliver us some good gains? So that probably is the biggest challenge we face in the next year and a bit on that front, if I didn't lose everyone in that long-winded description of the whole thing. Lee keeps telling me I've got to dumb it down, try not to talk technical, don't use acronyms.
No. This lot you can
Yeah.
use as many technical terms as you like. Andrew, the one thing I would say that we perhaps could add into there, and I think it'll be a useful discussion for New Zealand to have in the next few years, and is how some of the tools that farmers are going to need to use to achieve emission reduction are going to be challenging for us to accept. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got the obvious one is the genetically modified ryegrass that ag research is developing, potentially a 30% reduction. And when you think about these mitigation options that are potentially available, grass is the easiest one to put into our system. It's just, we feed the grass anyway. Most of us are resowing some grass each year. So being able to plant the new variety and utilize it, there's no long-term changes you've got to make to your system. Some of the other potential options out there, the vaccine, the feed inhibitor, that requires you to do something slightly different to what you've normally done. So, you'd have to, the vaccine, be getting them in on a regular basis to give them a jab. Yes, you do that already, but it's another jab. And I mean, the feed inhibitor, that's going to work for, well, potentially if they can develop a slow release version, that might work for farm systems like mine, where milking the cows twice a day and they've got access to meal. And so I've got an ability to put that feed inhibitor in front of them. But for a sheep and beef farm, that's not going to be an option to get those animals in. It need to come in a bolus form. And then there's a question of how many boluses can you put in these animals before you start creating issues around plastic pollution, etc. So there's quite a number of trade-offs there. Obviously, that GM discussion is one as a nation. If it's time, we could have a grown-up conversation about it. Would be fantastic. Because I certainly think, when I look at the potential options that are available, and the breeding of the livestock is probably the simplest ones for us to fit in, because it's just utilizing stuff we're already doing, just taking up the latest rather than doing something completely new.
Awesome. Any other questions, guys? Sarah, you
no, nothing.
got a couple more minutes.
That.
Okay. All right.
Excellent.
That's it. We're done. Thank you very much, Andrew, on behalf of the Ag Genos Guild and the communicators. We appreciate that. It's and thank you, Sarah, for making this possible for us. It's been great.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
See ya. Bye.